All right, good morning, everyone. It's Wednesday, July 14th at 9:30 a.m. We are taking up the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee's review of Thrive Montgomery 2050, which is a update revision of the Montgomery County General Plan on wedges and corridors. And today, council staff has prepared some presentations for us, and we'll hear, of course, from planning. We're joined by Chair Anderson, Director Wright, Tanya Stern, the Deputy Director, Carrie McCarthy, Functional Planning.
Research and Strategic Projects.
Thank you, Research and Strategic Projects. We have actually I probably have another screen of folks who are here, but we're joined by council staff, the heavy hitter team. We got Pam Dunn, Linda McMillan, Glenn Orland. And so I will not belabor it. Why don't we just get into it? I don't think it's needed for me to prepare any remarks. We'll talk a little, we'll go through some presentations today, and then I think we need to talk a bit about timeline and kind of, how this is all going to proceed. I guess Gwen, would you like to?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, is Councilmember Jawanda joining us today?
I presume so. I just, didn't want to put him on the spot by pointing out that he's not here yet, but.
I just didn't know if he was going to be absent today or if he was going to be present.
I have texted him, and perhaps he's got summer camp drop off or something like that. Okay, so Pam, why don't you kick us off? And I think let's not do a lot of introductory comments. Let's just get right into it here. So Pam, take us away.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my screen because, as you may have looked at the staff report, it's really a briefing on what is the plan. It actually today does not even get into the planning board draft. This is all about what's the general plan, what does it require, what do they look like, what do other ones have in them. Just because this council and this committee have never reviewed the general plan before, and the last time even a part of it was done was in 2011 when it was adopted. The last full rewrite of it, or at least comprehensive revision, was 1993. Anyway, we'll go through all that, but I have some slides to walk through while we talk about it, because otherwise you can be just listening to me talk for probably 20 minutes or a half hour. That's boring. So I'm going to share my screen, pull up a PowerPoint for you. You can see, let me get out of this mode. Sorry about that. Well, okay, there we go. Sorry about that. All right, so as I mentioned, we really are just here to talk about what is a general plan. The general plan is a comprehensive framework for guiding the physical development and managing limited resources in the county. This is really from the 93 refinement. It emphasizes it's a policy document whose concepts are general in nature. Right? This is not a master plan or a sector plan. And as the county's longest range and most visionary document, the purpose of the general plan is to provide a broad image of how the county will evolve in the future. And it establishes a frame of reference for decisions that get made about land use that will help basically make that vision become reality. The general plan provides a basis, as we just said, for more specific master plans and sector plans and functional plans. And in turn, each master plan, sector plan, or functional plan does constitute an amendment to the general plan. And the land use article requires that the commissions review their comprehensive plans once every 10 years. However, Montgomery County, like other jurisdictions in the state of Maryland, by doing master plans and sector plans, those limited planning exercises are viewed as updates to the comprehensive plan, but they must be consistent with the one that is called the comprehensive or general plan. So while master plans and sector plans and functional plans are much more specific in nature, and as we know that the master plans are always accompanied by a sectional map amendment that implements zoning, they update the general plan, but they must be consistent with the principles in the general plan. Because again, the general plan is really about the guiding principles for growth. I just wanted to show you, this is a zoning map, current zoning map, and overlaid is the outline of the 1993 general plan refinement map. So I didn't label the sections, but I just wanted to give you a quick view that, yes, in fact, the master plans and sector plans that implement zoning in this county and have for the last 30 years have done what looks like a pretty good job of following those outlines, right? We see very similar colors and very similar shaded areas there, or very, the rural area, the residential wedges, the suburban area, and then we have the inner ring and the corridor.
Those are the wedges there, right? The black outlines.
So this is the residential wedge here and here. This is the suburban area here and here. This is the inner ring. This is the corridor. And then
the corridors and the wedges are overlaid upon one another in this framework. The corridors run through wedges.
No, this is
they run through a wedge. No?
Just this is the primary. In the 93 plan, it really had one primary corridor, which was the I-70 corridor.
I see. So it's the corridor is the main one. It's not really multiple corridors. It's the corridor, and then there's the wedges.
Right. These are suburban, and this is suburban, and then they have residential, and then we have the rural and agricultural out here. This is the inner ring. So, but anyway, it's just an illustrative map to show you how well the
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but that's important because that illustrates a broad issue that we've talked about a bit, which is you don't see a major corridor going up the east side of the county.
Correct. And it wasn't in the 93 plan. That's right.
So, one of the issues that this plan does address is, shouldn't there be more of a corridor on the east side of the county? And, it's worth observing that the plan that we have been working from for all these decades does not have one. So we have one big corridor going up the middle in a sense, and then these residential wedges around them. Okay.
Can I add that the 62 and 69 plans did have a corridor that was called the I-95 corridor, and US 29 was sort of the west edge of it, but 29 itself wasn't a corridor. But Pam's right, the 93 update didn't show that.
And then these corridors were planned out with corridor cities, which are Germantown, Clarksburg, etc., and corridor cities transit way, in addition to Metro, 270 corridor, etc. So just the same vision wasn't put in place for the East County. So that's what we see around us today. Okay. I wanted to hit that because that's one of the issues that it seems to me this plan does address. What we've received seeks to address that fundamental issue. It's one of, several kind of meta issues of this general plan update. That's all. Thanks.
Sure. So this is a general slide. I'm just trying to get a feel for in one picture. So, how was the 1964 plan organized? What were the elements of it? What did it include? What did it address for the county to look at as it moved forward? We know that only 5 years later, the 69 plan was developed, and it has a more concise outline to it. And that was a prominent feature of it, and intention was to have this precise and condensed outline that it felt that all master plans should also have this outline. And then we have the 93 refinement that really was about like a relook at everything. And so it's spent a lot of pages and time thinking about the vision for the county. What does it actually mean to have a vision for the county? How do we weave that into the impetus for a general plan? It provides legislative history and the adoption process. It's got a lot of good background material in it. People reading it will get a real sense of what is a general plan and why do we have it. And then in the whole second half of the 93 refinement, again, it has these goals, objectives, and strategies. And this is a common theme. It's a common theme in what was in the 69 plan, the 93 refinement, and what you'll find in some of the award-winning plans. Many of them spend the whole first half talking about the vision. Why is the plan necessary, and what do they expect to happen? So what they expect to happen or want to happen helps develop the principles around which those land use decisions will be made. And so that's what you see in the second half, it helps create the goals for land use, housing, economic activity, transportation, environment. Within those, after you establish what those goals are to help get to your vision, many of these plans, and ours as well, back in 69 and in 93, they set out objectives, which are ways to try to reach those goals. And then under the objectives are actually actions or strategies to reach those objectives. So under each of these sections here, housing, employment, transfer, they all had a scope, key concepts. What was the change that occurred from 69, the relationship with other goals, and then the goal strategies and objectives themselves. In addition, the general plan has to include, and the one the planning board sent over has an appendix A that it describes how the draft does this, but they must address or include the 12 visions and implement these through the zoning ordinance and regulations, the 12 visions that came out of the Maryland Planning Act, and these are the 12 framework issues, whatever that these visions address. I didn't put in all the text for them, but they're in the staff report. And so then we spend time looking at, what do other general plans have? If we haven't done a comprehensive one in 30 years, let's look back and say, okay, other places are doing them. They do them all the time. And the APA gives out the Daniel Burnham Award in National Planning Excellence for the best comprehensive plan every year. So I looked at the last 5 years, 2017 to 2021. And you can see the plans on the screen that have won that award. So I'm going to show you some slides from those plans. So Richmond 300, the reason I picked 300 is in 2037, the city of Richmond will be 300 years old. And so the city did its comprehensive plan. It was recently adopted back in this last September. And it has, it sets out a core concepts and a vision for what it expects. It gives you a general layout for what you're going to get in the plan. Here's the core concepts, but then here are what I would call the primary elements of the plan, like we have in our 93 plan: land use, housing, transportation. They have similar features. And again, like you could have said that it was similar to our 93 plan, sets out a vision, provides the goals, the objectives, and the strategies to reach that. And theirs is based on nodes. Ours, we talk a lot of times about activity centers in Montgomery County. In Richmond, they talk about nodes. They define what they are, how they work. They provide a really good map about where they're located and what they mean. They pull out graphics to show anyone interested what that can mean for what that might look like if it does develop. Again, these are guiding principles. They aren't land use changes. When they get down into the specifics, like, all right, we have a transportation section and we have, which was equitable transportation. One of the goals is related to Vision Zero. In this plan anyway, they give existing context for it. I don't know if you can see it on your screen, but they give the objective, which is to reduce all traffic deaths. And then they provide like the action plans to do it, and always supported with some type of graphic about how do we look at this. And in this case, it's the map involving pedestrian and bicycle crashes. Unique to this plan was these, what they called the big moves. They had 6 of them, and they were really, these are 6 big things that we need to do. We need to do them in the next 5 years, right? We may have a plan that's 25-year plan or 15-year plan, but we're going to do things in 5 years. And what are they? They're the big moves, and they are rewriting their zoning code, reimagining growth nodes, the things you see here on the screen. So that was kind of unique to their plan, that they provided something that you would think of as a jump start as far as actionable items. And then they were the only plan, but super interesting. They actually did a survey during the pandemic. They asked residents, what did they think life was going to be like post-pandemic? And that's what's on the screen here. They got over 500 responses to it. And this is, what people were saying about whether they thought there would be more bike riding is one of them, whether they needed more sidewalks, whether more balconies and porches would be desired features in the environment in which they live. Anyway, it's unique. No other plans have this. Of course, the other ones were older, so they weren't during the pandemic. It made sense, but still a super interesting feature. In fact, that they undertook this during the pandemic. The survey ran from April of 2020 through August of 2020. Let's see. So this is the plan that won in 2020, and it is in Hawaii. So the community itself is not huge. Kauai is, let's see how many people. I think it's around 72. 72,000 people.
I just want to note that's where 15 years ago my wife and I went on our honeymoon. It's a beautiful island.
I kind of get out of order. Sorry, we skipped Memphis. We'll cover it next. And anyway, you can see here from their outreach, so 72,000 people, but their outreach was quite extensive. They got over 1,700 comments and testimony on their draft plan. And their plan, again, is organized slightly differently. All of them are, but interesting features to it, right? They have a whole section on future land use and how the future land use relates to what their policy objectives are and how it aligns with them. They have a whole another section on actions. Again, this gets into sort of that similar theme of providing an objective and a strategy for obtaining it. And sort of here, I want to just highlight what their elements are: housing, transportation, critical infrastructure, the economy, energy sustainability, and climate change. These were important areas that they focused on in each individual section. Here are with the Memphis, got those two reversed. Memphis 3.0. Again, they named theirs after the fact that they're going to be entering their third century as a city, and had spent time thinking about, well, in the next century, what do we, next few years, decades, what do we want this city to look like? So they developed their plan around anchors. Again, we have activity centers. They chose anchors. They have really detailed information to explain, well, what do these type of anchors maybe look like? And there's 6 versions here. They provide a whole section on change, and it's cultivating change is the title of it. And it's about degrees of change and how do we think about them. And one is nurturing change, one is accelerated, one is sustainable change. And then they provide a map with highlighted areas to show per anchor what they think about the change around each of these anchors might be and how far it might go out. So this was totally new and super interesting to think about, like presenting something that way. The next plan was Oklahoma City. They presented what they called the big ideas. They had, I think it's 7 big ideas, and these framed their planning thoughts and how they developed where they thought the city was going to go. Again, they are a basis for their vision, right? To have these 7 big ideas.
Those look kind of like the chapters of the and that was drafted.
Right. Again, transportation is typically always a separate chapter. Housing, health is not uncommon to see. Again, this is like urban design. And then we have neighborhoods, efficient development, and then the last one, I don't know if you can see it on your screen, depending on how your border's set up, but there's natural character. And they did scenario testing, and actually that's another feature that we'll talk about at the end, but every single one of these award-winning plans did some type of scenario evaluation, whether that was, something that they did early on to like help them frame their vision, or whether it was something that they did after they had started their visioning, but helped them frame their land use changes or their future land use map. Almost all of them, I think all of them, have future land use maps that are critical to what they talk about. And they all did this type of scenario testing, or this one was unique in that it actually not only did certain scenarios, but then provided the performance of those scenarios for different elements, like the city services and infrastructure. How did they rank compared to each other and what they were going to cost? Automobile expense, new development in square miles. Anyway, it was each one does slightly different scenario testing, but they're all quite fascinating. And then the plan is set up that it shows when you're talking about something, a particular element of their plan, they highlight it, they list the goals for it. In this case, it had to do with transportation. And then the initiatives are, you could think of them as actions, things we talk about in our general plan as actions or strategies. They list their initiatives, and then they show in this crosshatch here is really how each one of those actions, what are the goals that they fulfill. So the goals were listed over here, these 9 goals, and then here's how each one of these actions may address one of those goals. And then last, we have the Plano Tomorrow plan. This is all web-based, so a little harder to pull things out to show you. They don't have a printed plan. It's all on the web. And they based it on what they call 5 pillars, again, built environment, social environment, natural environment, economic development, and the last one, if you can't see it, is regionalism. And then there are these elements underneath here. So under the built environment, they have a whole section on land use and community design. Then they have transportation, housing, and neighborhoods. So you can see how they have taken these pillars, but then the gray down here, these are what you would think of as the elements of the plan. What do they pull out as chapters to really provide those goals, objectives, actions, or strategies? If you click in farther, again, you get to see that. So you have like the pillars here, which are these. Again, like I said, these are the chapters in me. And then again, as being an interactive web-based plan, you can click on any of these things down here to guide how you want to read about the plan. If you dig in a little deeper here, this is what you get. Being web-based, this was interesting, is they're in real time updating it. So here you had, after the plan had been adopted, related to diverse and resilient economic action statements, you know, they had things they were doing, and here's the status, whether they're pending or in progress. You could still provide feedback on the plan, and here are their partners. Interesting. I think that's about it. That covers sort of, I wanted to give you just a highlight of what those plans all looked like as context. They're all different. You know, ours is the one the planning board sent over is different as well. I mean, it has different phrases, different sections, but trying to pull out some similarities. And so you'll see in the staff report, I tried to summarize what they were. And so one thing is that they all did provide a thorough vision for the future. They laid out core concepts, whether they call them concepts, values, goals, pillars, big ideas. They were foundational to how they developed the plan, and it was very clear. And well, I'll add, as I went back and reread a lot of them and trying to prepare the PowerPoint, most of them did extensive outreach to create the vision. And that was where sometimes some of the scenario testing went in, sometimes not. They all specify particular elements such as land use, transportation, housing, and the environment. And under those, like I said, there's a hierarchy of goals, objectives, and actions. In all these plans, land use was a prominent element of the plan, having its own section or chapter, and included a future land use map that was usually pretty detailed. Not zoning, but just in general, what do we expect in land use? Growth scenario planning was referenced in all the plans, as I've mentioned multiple times, and scenario maps were sometimes used to inform the future land use map. In general, maps were a prominent feature in all of these plans, multiple maps in almost every section or chapter, which makes sense because this does guide land use. And then outreach, again, for these plans were very successful, engaging thousands of participants, and in some cases, this represented a huge, not a large portion of the population, but in comparison to other places, it was impressive. I think it was Memphis reached 15,000 people had not just learned about their plan, 15,000 people participated in the Memphis plan. So, that's tremendous. That's being able to build a vision with a lot of buy-in, as you had a lot of people in your community involved with and excited about what you're doing. So that's
you are Pam. You are implying that there could be a difference between some of these plans and the plan that we've received, but I'm not sure. So can you tell us why you set this up as you've done today, and what lessons do you draw? And can we hear about what our plan that we've received, how it presents itself?
So one takeaway from the plan that we've received, which is different than the prior ones we have and from the ones we've been looking at, are the number of specific elements or chapters that get focused on in the plan. And there has been a change from what the staff draft had formatted and created to what the planning board chose as a board to send over. And you heard about that in your public hearing. That's not news. In the public hearing, when you did hear people that were concerned about what was in the general plan, a lot of times I think you heard that they were concerned that certain chapters had been, in their mind, removed from the plan. Now, I think the planning board would say, well, we incorporated those ideas or those principles throughout the document, so we didn't need an individual chapter. I think for the community, it makes it harder for them to understand, one, where that information landed, but two, this document should provide clear guidance. And so having a chapter on environmental sustainability and climate change would provide clear guidance. And you may not need to look through all the other chapters to find what that guidance is. So that's a difference.
So let me cut to the chase there. Like, I'm definitely convinced that we need to have that chapter on the environment back in the main plan. Like, no question about that. Let's do that. I would like to know what the other chapters were. I am looking here at a whole appendix about outreach and engagement. It looks impressive to me, but, are you able to assess our engagement effort?
Okay, I have done a little looking at it, and I don't know if Linda's still watching. I would love it if Linda could jump in. She's done more evaluation looking at the engagement compared to some of the other plans that we were evaluating.
So I think if you look at the engagement, and I will preface this by saying, of course, Park and Planning is doing this in an unprecedented time, some pre-pandemic, but some pandemic. So we have, different issues in front of us. They do have a lot of community events. I think that when you look at the numbers of people who specifically responded to surveys or engagement and compare it to particularly like Memphis, which I think had a really strong engagement with a lot of very specific communities. They have a page in their plan about engaging with the arts community. They list many of the community-based organizations that they engage with. The question is, with all the efforts that Park and Planning made, were they able to actually reach and hear from as broad a scope of our residents as perhaps some of these other jurisdictions have?
Well, let's hear. Thank you, Belinda. Let's hear from planning. I mean, I attended some pretty impressive community engagements, and we don't really know what Memphis is counting as an engagement. I mean, maybe you looked a little closer, but there's lots of ways to present numbers about what engagement means. And
if I could just jump in for a moment, please.
Yeah, if you could
things...
also address when you answer the question, like, were groups engaged? Like, was the NAACP engaged? Was there specific organized group engagement as part of it? Thanks.
So the first thing I want to say is that I think, number one, I do appreciate council staff trying to explain very clearly what a general plan is and what a general plan is not. In Thrive Montgomery, we have attempted to do that very specifically, and because it's a question that we've gotten. Page 4 talks specifically about what is a general plan.
And it pulls a lot of the same language, actually, that council staff has just mentioned, and it's in the document. We also talk about what Thrive Montgomery can and cannot achieve. On page 132 of the plan, we specifically talk about, what can we expect from a general plan? It is meant to be a policy document, not something that is going to change specific land uses. In addition, in Thrive Montgomery, we go through in the appendix, starting on page 141, all of the visions of the State Planning Act, vision by vision, and we talk about how Thrive relates to each aspect of the State Planning Act. We have worked extremely closely with the State Office of Planning, and they have been following this project every step of the way to assure that this plan is consistent with good planning principles. The other thing, though, that I want to remind everyone, and again, it's a little difficult because when we started this process 3 years ago with the council talking about this project, one of the things we committed to was getting it to you in a timely way, doing really good outreach, and keeping the council involved every step of the way, so that if you saw major problems where this project was going in a direction that you did not support, you could tell us. And I don't know if Khalid has the list, but we have done numerous briefings with the PHED committee and with the full council to explain the framework of this document, which has not changed, the three major goals or outcomes of economic success, environmental sustainability, and community equity. We've talked with the council about, frankly, even the organization of this plan. We talked about the different chapters, or we've talked about what we called the big ideas, which is sort of similar in a way to the Richmond plan that was being cited. We have been bringing you along every step of the way, because what we actually feared is exactly what's happening right now, which is that we produce a final document and we are going to go back to step one in terms of thinking about the document. We did all of the briefings because we wanted you to understand how this document was coming together. So again, Khalid, I don't know if it may be, we can at another point send the information about the different briefings that we did and give you all of the PowerPoints that we did on these different briefings, but maybe this is not the time. The other thing about outreach, which makes me, again, very concerned, is that I think we have done award-winning outreach on this plan. And in fact, once it's done, we do plan to submit our work for APA awards, specifically on the outreach. We have had over 180 community meetings, both in person and virtual. At each of those meetings, we've had 10, 20, in some cases 40 or 50 attendees at these meetings. At our most recent meeting that I attended with the Civic Federation, and there was a concern expressed about, not enough time to talk about Thrive, I asked the president, Alan Bowser, how many times have we presented to the Civic Federation and asked for your input and thoughts? And he sort of uncomfortably responded 4 separate occasions. And I said to him, have we ever, after any of those 4 separate occasions, turned down another group who asked to meet with us? And he said, no, you haven't. we have met with, and there's a partial list at the back of our appendix about our meetings that talks about the various groups that we have met with. Everyone from the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, folks in the Civic Federation.
Where's that list? What page are you looking at?
Okay, we have a whole separate appendix. It is a separate document that was sent to you.
Yeah,
That is
I'm
all
in
about
it.
outreach,
But what
right?
pa-
So
Go back to
that
page
list starts
46.
on page 45. Yeah.
Yeah, 45 is full events, and then it moves into all the specifics.
Great.
You know, we went out to every community event in the days before COVID. We were at farmers markets. We were at National Night Out events. We did speaker series and literally filled our auditorium at the old MRO building, which meant probably close to 100 people at each of our speaker series to talk about topics related to this plan. We've been to the Ag Reserve, we've been to Long Branch, we've been to White Oak.
Remember the Burtonsville Placemaking Festival?
We did
That
the
was awesome.
Burtonsville
It's like-
Placemaking Festival, and we used any event that we had as an opportunity to pull out our team about Thrive and have them have a booth at that event and talk to people, to have not just, you know, a written survey, although we did a survey as well, but to actually have conversations with one-on-one with people. So we were not just, you know, talking at people, but we were trying to talk with people. So I honestly think if you want to fault anything about this plan, the one thing I don't think you can fault is the outreach. The outreach has been extraordinary. And honestly, what I think I want to emphasize is, as part of that, when you had your public hearing and when the planning board had its public hearing, we heard from an enormous number of people who had never testified at a hearing before. Our goal in this was to reach people who did not participate in the planning process. We know the Civic Federation members have testified at a lot of public hearings, but, you know, does the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce testify at public hearings? No, maybe not so much. You know, we need to bring in people who did not typically participate in the planning process. And I think the very fact, if you look at your own lists of people who testified at your hearing and you see the unusual number of names that are people who you haven't heard of before, who aren't the usual suspects, I think that speaks to our outreach.
If I could chime in briefly on that point, Gwen, because I was going to bring it up. You know, we had 2 long public hearings. We had, I don't know, 50, 60 or so people testify. And it's interesting that you bring that up. One of the things I was actually concerned about is in the second long session we had with about 50 or so folks, there were 2 African-American people who testified out of the whole group. And they were both older Black women who were against the plan, who are known quantities who I've seen before and have come back and testified. Similar, I don't know the exact numbers. I didn't count them exactly in the first long one, but I was very concerned by that. And it's not because I don't think all the things you described, I remember the pre-pandemic, kind of visioning board exercises when we were doing those and as kind of a kickoff. And I was very supportive about the current timeline of you all moving forward and trying to produce a plan. When we made those decisions, we didn't know there was going to be a global pandemic. And that obviously distracted everybody. from, and I know not to say that you all didn't continue to do work, because you absolutely did. And you just outlined here extensively a lot of the work that you did. But council members, our staff, the community at large, it's an impact. It's a once in a lifetime thing that no one could have expected it could have happened. And it did have an impact on, I'll just speak personally, on my ability to provide the kind of ongoing and constant feedback that you described. I'll just speak for myself personally. I was not able to do that because we're focusing on the very immediate issues of the pandemic. And so, it's not from my perspective, it's not that you all didn't do great work and attempt to persevere through the last, 16, 17 months after having a great start. I just think that when I see 60 people testify and two are Black and they're people that I know and they're against the plan, that's not good enough. And when I talk to people in my community here in East County, they don't have any clue about this, right? And you're never going to get everyone to know about it. But I just think, when I said, did we talk to some of the organizations, right? There are one of the things I would have suggested if I had not had to focus on the pandemic, I would have brought together groups of, for example, let's stick with the African American community, defined folks that are members of organizations in the African American community that certainly care about these issues, that could sit down in a really intelligent way and talk to you about what they are seeing and what they want to see in their neighborhoods and communities. That did not happen I wasn't able to do that. And we weren't able to do that. So I do have that concern. Does that mean we have to scratch the whole plan and go back to square one? Absolutely not. But I do think that there should be a way that we can build in maybe a supplementary kind of outreach process as we move through the council side of the process. That's what I'm trying to suggest, and working with you guys to do that as we consider the plan that you've put forward. So I just want to put that on the table because it's relevant to the point we're making now. I do think that there would be some value in that.
So you're suggesting we work with planning to conduct a meeting or a series of meetings?
Yeah, I think so. And again, we can still be considering it in the, I know when we talked about when we opened back up in September, several of us suggested, I was one of them, that, maybe we can have another, like an in-person public hearing and do some targeted outreach ahead of that. And then have some other meetings with planning and still be having our PHED sessions, not fully deciding anything. But, I just, I think there is a need for that, because I don't think what we saw was representative.
Okay. Well, definitely organize some additional community engagement. I do want to broadly say, I'm sure there are some shortcomings that, in what happened. But if we could also just zoom out and ask whether we've had, a full effort at community engagement and successful results. It has been my impression that, without looking as closely at, specifics, that the broad level of engagement has been what we would expect from the effort. So,
absolutely. I think the effort has been there. I just think there was unforeseen circumstances. That's my point. That's what I'm trying to make.
Part of the
I guess what I'm trying to
problem-
get at is, I want to engage with Councilmember Duano a little bit. There will be many people who say, and are saying, that we should not proceed with this plan because it is, there hasn't been an opportunity for the community to engage. And that's not what I have seen. What I have seen is that there have been many opportunities for the community to engage, and there's been a genuine effort. It could be strengthened, but I think there is a kind of core question of, do we feel as council members that there's been sufficient engagement for us to proceed? Because we shouldn't make these kinds of, even though this is only a policy document, we shouldn't make a change unless we feel that the community has been part of that process.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think you've absolutely identified an opportunity for us to strengthen this whole process. But, you know, I think we'll want to be sure, each of us, and say so publicly, like whether we feel that the whole effort is sufficient. I'm concerned by what council staff is saying because it's implying that the whole effort has not been sufficient, which is sort of a back to the drawing boards kind of comment. So, you know, I don't, that was kind of
I don't
my,
know what she's saying, Pam.
I don't know either. That's part of the issue. I think we're all
No,
confused.
I'm not trying to say that. So let me
Okay.
be clear about that. And I am trying to acknowledge the hopefully once in a lifetime situation of the pandemic. So some of the effort that Park and Planning put forth wouldn't be what they would have done if there weren't a pandemic. I think that
But that's
I
implying,
just want to say, I think that the issue is if
there was a
it's
pivot.
exactly the issue of, you do want to make sure that as a policy document, and as you see in these other plans, that you feel confident that you've heard sufficiently from all segments of the public so you can make your decisions. And that's all that, so it's having a conversation around what was done, which is extensive. You can look at the list. They had information on buses. They, you know, have a website. They have a lot of information in there about what it was. The question is, like, have you heard sufficiently from all the segments of our residents that you would like to hear from so that you can make these policy decisions?
Thank you. So can I ask planning, could you just talk a bit about your pivot during, because, you know, I attended a number of your events. I remember the East County, you know, the Burnsville placemaking event, because it was just so cool. There were hundreds of people out at an event that you organized, and it just felt like this is what it's all about.
So,
The pandemic came along 6 months later. Talk to us about your pivot.
well, a couple of things. First, I want to make the point that it is hard enough to explain to council members what a general plan is and how it is different than a local plan that's going to change the zoning 3 doors down from you or move a bus stop that's on your street. It is really hard to get the average citizen to think about a vision for 20, 30, 40 years in the future. Folks are very focused on what's happening in my neighborhood today and what's going to happen in my neighborhood next week. They're less focused on the long picture, which is why in our early kinds of meetings, we did those picture boards that you remember all over the county. We had events and we did these boards because what we were trying to do is get people to engage and think long term. And we took those picture boards very seriously because we listened to the things, we didn't draw them. We just had people walk up and the artist who was there drew whatever people said. And we listened to what folks had to say and we listened to their comments, and then we heard about their desires for more walkability. That was almost on every single one of those picture boards. We heard about their desire for more green space, more parks. That was on every single one of the picture boards. So we didn't have people say to us, well, yes, in the general plan, you should allow for, 4 corridors and 3 parks on each corridor. And I mean, people do not provide that kind of input. And, again, because
Only the Civic Federation does, and they think that that's the only kind that counts, frankly.
Well, I think that it is important to remember that coming out of this general plan, there are going to be a whole series of master plans and sector plans that will implement this general plan. And there will be an opportunity to get down to the details of, You know, should there be a park on this corner or on that corner? Should there be a sidewalk here or a sidewalk there? That's what happens in master plans. And the general plan is the policy document. And we struggle with everyone to make sure that folks can stay focused on the big picture and not get down to what is going to be covered in master and sector plans. We showed a slide early on reminding folks that in the 1964 plan, it did not say create a transfer of development rights program that's going to allow 1 TDR per 5 acres of land. That, it said preserve open space and farmland. It wasn't until 16 years after that plan in 1980 that we had the preservation of agriculture and rural open space, which created the TDR program.
Gwen, can I just interrupt you, please? Can you just share for us, what do you think are some of the major differences in the plan that we received from the existing quarters and Wedges and quarters plan?
So I've said this many times before. This document, Thrive Montgomery, does not abandon Wedges and quarters. What it does is it modernizes it. It acknowledges that we have more than one corridor. You know, we talked with you, I remember Councilmember Jawando, you embraced my little concept about a web of corridors, and we joked about how this was a web. And I think that, to me, is one of the biggest differences. It basically says we aren't just the I-270 corridor in this county. We actually are the I-270 corridor, we're the Route 29 corridor, we're the Georgia Avenue corridor, we're the Veers Mill Road corridor, we're the Randolph Road corridor, and our
More finely grained. It's a more finely grained.
And that we still are very focused on the idea of directing growth in compact form
Okay, so
into the communities along those corridors.
It's really important to just see this big picture here. Like, this is not we're not throwing out the plan and writing something fresh. You're modernizing it, you're evolving it, but it's not fundamentally that. There are a few places where there are potentially powerful new approaches, but it's not like we're looking at 100,000 acres, hundreds of thousands of acres of land, and that's undeveloped, and we're charting out a different approach for how to develop that land from what was otherwise presented. Like, we're building on an existing model, and we're not getting rid of that model. So the plan that we approve is largely, it's just an evolution of the existing plan, and it's a ratification of the existing plan. So the expectations of how different it can be, how revelatory this document can be, I think have to be tempered a bit. I think there are ways that we can chart out some, there are some meaningful differences that are there, but anyway.
Well, the scenario planning that staff has mentioned, the one thing I wanted to say about that is we talked about that extensively when we began this planning process. What none of those other places have that we do have is the Council of Governments. And the Council of Governments does planning for how much growth is anticipated in different jurisdictions. And we update our projections for growth periodically. And so we don't feel like we have to reinvent the process of saying, okay, is it going to be 200,000 people in the next, 30 or 40 years, or is it going to be 300,000 people? We do that through the Council of Governments process, which is different than many of these other organizations. They don't have that. What we also do is, we I will admit, we made some decisions early on. The very basic decision was, do we stay essentially in the wedges and corridors framework and continue to grow near transit, or should this plan consider opening up the ag reserve? And we rejected opening up the ag reserve. That is a scenario we could have tested, and we could have looked at how much it would cost to take sewer and roads to the ag reserve. We could have explored how many housing units we could get in the ag reserve. That would be a big scenario that we could have tested. But we rejected that really based on what we heard from the input that we were getting, not just from the Montgomery Countryside Alliance, but from those pictures that people were drawing. Even people, in at a Silver Spring Farmers Market, they talked about, save the green space, save the environment, don't sprawl. I mean, we literally had people on those boards say, don't sprawl. And so, we could have tested a scenario saying, what would a sprawl scenario look like? But we made a decision at the get-go, and I apologize if that was a mistake, to not test a sprawl scenario, but to really continue to focus on the projections that we have through the COG process, and to sort of test, how many corridors should there be? How could we intensify the corridors to accommodate the new population that we expect? But there again, in a mature, built-out community, there aren't too many scenarios to test. It's either, from COG, you're going to have a certain number of people, and you either can put them in a compact form of development, or you can sprawl.
Well, I just want to say on that point that it might be worth a little discussion in the document in writing about the broader implications of growth in Frederick and, the county's policy and how it kind of pushes growth to Frederick. Because when people say don't sprawl, do they mean grow in Frederick instead of in Montgomery County? Because that's kind of what we're doing. But anyway, Pam?
I was just going to mention that I looked at it yesterday. Frederick also did scenario planning in their recently adopted comp plan, and Frederick did base it on COG, and they weren't about making different assumptions of how much would grow different from what COG estimates have been, and the fact that they participate. As they noted in their plan, what they based it on were different aspects of multimodal accessibility development. So again, scenario planning isn't always just about let's put out different rates of growth. It can also be about assuming different patterns of growth, different densities of growth in different locations, things like that. So, and that doesn't have to be about changing the ag reserve. It can be about testing different things within the places that you already know you do want to grow and don't want to grow. But I'm just saying, so it's not just communities that didn't have a COG were the ones that did scenario planning, because Frederick did some very impressive scenario planning as well.
Well, okay.
Chair,
Yes.
sorry. This is Khalid. Could I just share my screen for 2 minutes with you just to show you the point you were making, the evolution and how this plan is different or not, how it evolves?
Council staff may need to give you sharing.
I think.
Judith can do that.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
So this is just again going back to, this was the 64 wedges and corridors plan.
That's a region. This
is region. It was a regional plan. This is Montgomery County. This was I-270. This is 95, and here is. So this was what you call area of influence. So just quickly, just give you a broad overview. This is 93 plan, and 93 plan, what they call, they refined the wedges and corridors, same idea, how it happened between 64 and 93 and how it ended up being. So this was a depiction of what wedges and corridors evolved into in Montgomery County. So they called it urban ring here, the corridor, and these two wedges that were going out in Montgomery County, they divided it into a rural wedge, residential wedge, and suburban wedge on this side, and the same idea on this side. And that's where we say they took out, they don't even show I-95 or 29 as any influence, because you can see there's a bubble around. It's not a very narrow corridor. Same thing here. And the other thing is, this was a regional plan right after 64. It was for not only region, but it was as a commission document. The 64 plan was for both Montgomery and Prince George's counties. Prince George's County, within 5 years after 64, they dropped the wedges and corridor concept for their planning. It didn't pursue that. So that had some effects on how the region developed.
Can you go
This
back?
is,
Oh,
yeah, sorry.
no. Well, I don't know if this is the best time to say this, but maybe after your next slide. But I often look at this map or see it in my mind's eye and think we're the only ones left following this plan.
Yes, that's true. Virginia never warmed up to it. Commission did that. I mean, it came out of the, there was a national capital planning plan in 1960.
If you were to draw that map today, instead of having those two dark gray centers, you know, Baltimore and DC, you would have Virginia.
Right.
Overwhelming all of that. And
Yes.
I do think there is a need of this plan to grapple with a different regional pattern. It's like we're assuming that we're fitting into this pizza with the same, you know, but everything has changed around us. Frederick isn't even on that.
And we have a plan in the Thrive which shows our regional influences and regional centers of employment and everything and how we fit into that. But let me just quickly roll through this 193. This is the growth map, what we call in growth map. And you mentioned evolution of the wedges and corridors. This is what we are saying is happening now. And those are the three tiers. Again, the outer, this has become the, you call it wedge or not, but this is what we are saying, the rural and agricultural area of growth. This central area, the lightest blue, are what we call the growth focused area, corridor focused growth area. And then these spaces in between are what's remained of the residential communities within that.
Yeah.
Now, if you compare,
that was actually one of the questions I had, was this map of what these areas, what does medium actually mean and what does small mean? And you know, it was a little ambiguous to me.
right. So we can certainly provide that, and we have been doing that with the community for some comments. Now we compared this map to give you an idea of how this, remember these three outlines, this outline of rural wedge and this outline of growth corridor, and these three, if you overlay that on the 93 plan, you can see how close it is. So our corridor focused growth area with some, again, evolution of what happened. On the corridor here, it's strictly, this is the new corridor focused growth area map and how it closely matches with some adjustments we have made, and I can show you that, why that's happening. This is the same 93, these are the 93 wedges and corridors depiction on today's current zoning. And there have been some changes here and there, as you can see in this area and here. This is our growth map overlaid on the same today's zoning map. And you can see how we tailored and stayed to that, but made some adjustments based on that zoning. For example, here there was, you know, the agriculture area stayed back. And in this one, we have adjusted to make that boundary more consistent with what we are seeing on the ground. We also looked at where the densities are today, where the development is not by zoning, not by, you know, this is what you call the density by a level of activity in the area, not by FAR, not by number of units, where people are, where the activity is happening. And you can see that, again, it very closely matches not only keeping the corridor and urban growth, except that Georgia Avenue corridor or 29 corridor, we think, do deserve to be looked at slightly differently. And these areas in crosshatch are what we call special protection areas. We purposely carved them out here. This is already in the Clarksburg 10 Creek Master Plan. It's been taken care of very carefully. It's there. So this is how I just wanted to show you, you talked about evolution. So this is the evolution of the Wedges and Corridors plan, not going away from it, but at least acknowledge the reality of what's on the ground and how we go forward with it. A couple of other things in terms of outreach that get lost in the detail. We sent, I believe, more than 93,000 postcards to what we call equity-focused areas of the county. Not, we didn't blanket the whole county, but we specifically very targeted areas to the places, again, in trying to, as Gwen said, trying to get to people who don't really participate in our planning process. The response was not as great as we thought, but obviously these people, we understand that they have other concerns, and general plan is hard to get excited about if you're not a policy wonk or something. In addition to that, for example, I've gone to religious land use group and their subcommittee on African Americans, Middle Eastern affairs, and a couple of other ethnic focus activity groups. And again, I made the presentation, talked about them, asked them to, I'll come back, never heard from them. It's hard to get people engaged in this kind of big picture idea before we have actual recommendations, because they have nothing to respond to. Once we got something out, for example, public hearing draft, the planning board public hearing draft, we got a little more engagement. So I would leave it at that, just to make sure. I just wanted to bring to you that some of the details that are not don't come out in these kind of summaries.
Okay. Well,
That's actually an important point, Mr. Chairman. What Khalid just made about the outreach, and I appreciate you being transparent about how difficult it is, and you all tried really hard. I do think having something to react to changes it, and I think we could get some with some more robust engagement now. But go ahead, Mr. Chairman. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Sorry. Well, I think that, all right, that's actually a good context here. We've got to get this plan done. And,
Can I just say something briefly?
Sure, Casey.
Yeah, I just want to make the point that almost without exception, everything on the list of things that are in those other plans are in this plan, with a couple exceptions. So just because we don't have a chapter heading that says environment, for example, if you want to put in an environment chapter, that's your prerogative, but nobody should be under the impression that big pieces of what goes in a general plan in terms of best practices have been left out of this plan. That's just not true. Almost every single thing on that list is in there. In a couple of cases, like the one you're talking about with scenario planning, we have not included some of that, but there's a reason for it. And again, that doesn't mean we were right or wrong in making a decision to leave out scenario planning, but it wasn't as though we forgot about it. It's, as Gwen explained, we felt that the COG forecast, which the council has endorsed most recently in embracing COG's housing goals, basically implied the county's policy is to accept the COG forecast as a given. So that's what we did. So that, again, it doesn't mean that you can't change it or shouldn't change it or that there wasn't another way to do it. But what I want to emphasize is when Pam says, well, Frederick did it and they've got COG, my response to that is, yeah, it's not to say we couldn't have done some scenario planning, but we felt that we had good reasons for not wanting to replicate that exercise or try to do it from scratch. And I think that you'll find if you read each individual chapter and the action items that go along with it, you're going to find that almost every single question that's being raised and has been raised through the public input process about what is purportedly missing from this plan is actually answered, and it's actually in there, and in some cases it's in there in quite a bit of detail. It just may not be organized in the same way that it's been organized in other general plans. And so I'd encourage you to, I think in some ways it would be helpful if we could get into the discussion of the specifics of what's in the document.
Yeah.
Because if you're not looking at the actual pieces, it's too easy to lose sight of that when we talk about it in these very general terms.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say something along those lines. Like, you know, if you look at the table of contents here, what I see is a lot of those same things that were highlighted as being great attributes of other plans. So we've got to get into what's in our plan. But to continue the thread, Councilmember Joando was discussing, like, we could, and with the context of we need to get the plan done. I think the only way to get this done in a timely manner is for us, all of us involved here, to put pen to paper and get some product written over the next month, to the extent that there are changes that are needed. It's July 14th now. We've got a couple more Fed sessions in July. Then we break for about 6 weeks. We come back in September. And I would like to have, 2 sessions in September to review changes and then adopt them as the committee, and then get it to full council so the full council can take it up. But if we embark upon a wholesale new writing, it's like, well, we won't finish it this term. So I'm just concerned about the timeline. And we've got some time because of the 6-week recess without 5 Fed committee meetings in a week like we have this week. But there's a lot here. We need to work it, finalize it, and keep moving. And then to Councilmember Joanna's point, like, we could do, Councilmember Joanna, if you wanted to do it yourself, that certainly is okay. We could do we could ask planning to convene some kind of community engagement forum, and we could do it as a committee. I'm not sure exactly where we would fit that in timing wise. We don't want to do it over August, I don't think, but and it would be tricky to do it in September while we're really seeking to finalize what changes we make.
Yeah, I know Andrew wants to respond. But if Andrew could, since he's bringing up this point in particular, I think we obviously want to finish this term, right? While you're chair of Fed. So, I guess I don't understand that timeline you set out, and why we couldn't why we couldn't just say we're going to finish it by the end of the year, or we're going to, whatever. Could you explain why you're saying that?
Well, thank you. So there's another initiative that you're familiar with called Attainable Housing.
Yeah.
That is intended to follow upon this. Like, we decided that the community engagement process of the general plan was important, and because attainable housing, missing middle was a theme of the general plan, we would allow that public conversation to, happen, and then establish through the general plan the kind of broad policy framework, and then we could take up a specific implementation of the general plan in the concept of attainable housing. So, that was sort of an intentional approach of first establish a policy, then establish an implementation. And the timing for all of that is tight. Attainable housing will take time at the council. Accessory dwelling units took almost a year. We certainly don't have that time. So, at some point, once we hit budget, you'll remember from our budget cycles, once we hit budget, there's very little bandwidth for significant, policy at the council. So it's really like we need to get stuff done before March. And so if you want to book a couple months for attainable housing, work backwards to December.
It seems like December, January. So it seems like we could do this by the end of the year and still do that. I mean,
I think, again, think about it, like, if you finalize this, I mean, even from introduction, if there's a new ZTA that planning sends us, which is we expect, that's 30 days.
There is a pending ZTA.
And there's one before the body as well.
Yeah.
But I think you will find that our community members want a new public hearing. You know, that's what they'll say, and we may want to allow for that. So, you know, if you imagine some kind of fresh community engagement around attainable housing, then, you know, the timeline stretches out. It's like hard to imagine doing that faster than 3 months, let alone, you know, so that's why you have to really, it's hard to sequence these things.
And there are other projects lined up behind all of that. Corridor Forward, the Silver Spring Downtown Plan. You all are going to be getting those this winter, and you need to have time to deal with those as well. So, you know, there was an approved timeline in our, you know, semi-annual. Every semi-annual we come to you, we ask if you want us to speed up or slow down projects. And you look at it and you tell us what we need to do. And we line up other projects based upon that. We asked you in the last 2 semi-annuals, do you want to extend the Thrive? Because you had letters from the county executive saying, take more time, take more time. And we specifically asked in the semi-annuals, do you want to extend Thrive? And this council said no.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between extending it on your end and the time we take to consider it. And I know that's always an inherent, I've been on PHED long enough now to realize that inherent tension of when you all send us something and the time or you know, either lack of time, enough time, or time we have to consider things. And in between all that was, as I mentioned, was this once in a lifetime pandemic where, again, I'm going to speak for myself personally, have not been able to devote the time to Thrive that I would have liked during the last 16 months. And so I'm on board. We should finish it this term. You know, maybe we need to look at everything else. I mean, I don't think my view is a minority view on the council as far as the timing. You know, I think there's going to be a desire from a lot of colleagues to look, you know, take our time and look at this appropriately. But I am committed to getting it done. We should get it done. I just think because of what's happened, we're in a unique situation. You know, the good thing about this, if you were to have the kind of some additional engagement, for example, on Thrive, attainable housing, missing middle housing is a key component of this, among other things. You're going to get feedback and input on that. So that's going to kind of be a twofer in the sense of, you know, you're going to get some feedback on that potentially. But anyway, my point being, I don't know if we have to, you know, obviously we'll do what the committee, the majority wants, but, you know, the idea that we would try to put ourselves on this tight timeline, you know,
well, we could just not do attainable housing.
Could I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Could I get in here a little bit? I mean, if that would be okay. So,
yes.
I'm a little concerned about the process in general here. I will say I think it's unfair to the planning board staff in particular to suggest that they haven't done outreach, because I think that they've done significant outreach, and I think that the suggestion otherwise is not fair. And so I just wanted to point that out. And I have seen them at a number of events, places that I was surprised they would be engaging with people who don't normally show up to council meetings or to planning board, you know, meetings, or you know, folks who otherwise wouldn't be involved in the process. I think they've tried to do a proactive outreach, which, you know, isn't traditionally done, which is really laudable. I would be comfortable and supportive of having, you know, some type of, you know, in-person public engagement in the early fall, you know, between Labor Day and, you know, when we come back. I think that's a reasonable suggestion. I think, you know, that would reflect the fact that there has been a lot of outreach, but we have been in a difficult environment. I think that that's reasonable. I think, some of the suggestions, however, for the fact there hasn't been, a reasonable amount of outreach or sufficient outreach, I just don't think is fair. So I just wanted to note that. I'm also a little concerned with the process here as well. I mean, I think this whole briefing, respectfully, should have been part of one of the several PHED committee sessions we had before, where we talked about what a master plan is, or excuse me, what a comprehensive general plan is, what it's intended to be, what the history is, what some other places around the country are doing, so that we could get a sense of that and think through that and provide feedback for the way that this process was heading along, because that was the point at which we were supposed to be giving broad thoughts about where this process was heading and what should be incorporated and what shouldn't be. So I think we've got that backwards, and I'm pretty frustrated about it, and I just wanted to note that. I also think on the engagement piece, we've been aware of what type of engagement planning has been doing. They've been updating us at those various updates along the way. And so if there were significant concerns by staff or by council members about the type of outreach that was happening, I think that was the more reasonable and appropriate time to do it. So having said all that, I think we need a process here. I don't think we need to rush the process, and I don't think we should get the process backwards. And with all due respect to the interest in a lot of things, the general plan is the main thing. The ZTAs and the other master plans and the other things that we're doing are, what the general plan, sets forth and the broad vision that it allows. So, I do think, we're talking about attainable housing now as if the general plan is the vehicle to implement attainable housing, and that's just backwards. I think we've gotten that process wrong, respectfully. I understand the interest in this. I share the same, some of the same overarching goals of rethinking some of our land use patterns and trying to create the type of inclusive community that we all want and hope to achieve. But I do think that it's important that we do this general plan, that we do it right, and that we respect the process, and that we set forth a process now and we stick to it, because it does seem like we keep changing the process as we go through, and it really doesn't purport itself well to the planning staff who have spent years on this, and it doesn't, well, I think, to the public either, to understand what this process is.
Not the worst part to freeze on there. Okay.
Council Office IT, never the best. You back? We lost you there for a minute, Andrew, though, probably your last sentence.
Yeah, sorry. I just was saying, I don't think it is, if we don't have a clear process, it's hard for folks to realistically engage either. So, this keeps changing, this keeps moving. We had a process, then we changed it, then we, have moved it back. We had, scheduled sessions that we went to the public and told them these are the sessions where we're going to be taking this up, and we changed that. Now we're changing, the timeline. Whatever we decide, whether it's today or subsequent to this meeting, we need to be transparent about it. We need to put it out there, and we need to stick to it, and we need to move forward. I just think that is really important. So there's a few tangible things that I've heard here personally. One is, whether or not the idea of an in-person public engagement, is appropriate in early September. I think we can decide on whether or not we're going to move that forward and who's responsible for it. Is that planning? Is that the council? Is that this committee? I think we can, decide on whether or not that is appropriate and what that might look like. The staff has raised, specific highlights of other award-winning plans. I think it would be helpful if you actually came out with some of the best practices in there and said, here are some things that some other places have done that we aren't doing, and we would recommend that you include those. I'm not sure if the idea was to incorporate that in a future session, but I think that we ought to do that. And then we ought to have a process with sessions planned out of what we are taking up, what part of the general plan we're taking up, in what meeting. And if we need additional time for that particular conversation, it can go into the next meeting. But, you know, I do think up to this point, it hasn't been clear to me as a council member who sits on this committee. And so I'm sure it hasn't been clear to the public. And I think the planning staff, you know, deserves that chance to be able to make that case. And I think the public, even more importantly, deserves the chance to deal with that. So I'll yield back to.
So go ahead. If you want to say something, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I mean, I think that's what I've been articulating is a general process for what we're doing here. You know, my initial recommendation here for my colleagues is that we have staff and council members provide written changes to the draft, you know, between now and when we return in September, and we take those changes up. You know, if we can get some of them, I should think we ought to be able to get some of them on the board before we break in August at our next upcoming PHED meetings, and then the remainder prepared over August and into early September, and then we come back to review them. That would be my outline of, you know, procedure, and how to fit in some additional public engagement to that timeline. I'm still turning over in my mind here. Councilmember Delano.
Yeah, I you know, since I made the suggestion, I'll put a little more meat on the bones on the, you know, the fall engagement. You know, I think it should be a collaborative process. You know, the football has been passed, the baton has been passed, whatever analogy you want to use. You know, it's in our court now, and so we could work with the committee and council staff with planning to put together a suggested set of outreach. I do think an in-person, again, I will keep saying, I think a component of that should be a September, you know, 3rd public hearing that has robust outreach, maybe towards the end of the month. You know, that where, you know, I appreciate Councilmember Friesen's point. This is the thing, right? This is like, you know, if you want feedback on the thing, this is the thing. And then I'd like a series of focus groups with communities that I personally saw that were underrepresented. And I'm not saying this wasn't done. I agree, again, 100% clear. I know how hard planning has worked on this. They got smacked in the face by a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, and it changed the whole dynamic for all of us. And so I can suggest some of those groups. I think we can take that offline. I've suggested a couple already. Well, but where it could be a more in-depth, because I think there's a need for the general, like, here, come, tell us what you think, but also let's get some defined groups in a room now that we have this to react to, and then get some specific guided feedback from a focus group. So I think that could happen in September.
Well, that should happen sooner, please. That's, you know.
Okay, well, that can happen, you know, August, as you know, is a tough month for people.
August is a tough month, but.
You know, so, I mean, again, and that is a point though, like what are we committing to as far as the actual timeline? I think that outreach needs to happen. It needs to inform our process. And then what the actions the committee takes, you know, do we want to put the cart before the horse and make decisions before that stuff is happening?
Well, can I just respond here for a moment? So it's important for us to remember as a county council that the planning department is an arm of the county council. It's an arm of the legislative branch, and they conduct outreach on our behalf. And so, you know, conceptually, we shouldn't think of the need to conduct wholesale community engagement as a county council on land use, because that's why we created the commission, or the state created the commission. That's why we support it, and they do that for us. So I think it's an important, if we identify specific need, you know, specific engagements that could be added, but just very conceptually, and I'm not, just want to say this, I don't know that this is necessarily where you're going, but we could find that once we start community engagement, people say, well, you haven't done this, and you haven't done this, and you haven't done that. And I think our response would be, well, we did do that through the planning department process. And we just need to keep reminding ourselves and the public, like, that is what the planning department process accomplished. I guess I just want to say that, like, I think some specific opportunities would be good, but we don't want to broadly say, there should be a very large, engagement process analogous to what the planning department does at the county council. We want to do that at the planning department.
I make a suggestion.
Sure.
There's two things we're talking about here. I think both are important. One is the idea of having some type of, broad public outreach, one more opportunity to do this, recognizing that we were in a global pandemic to no fault of anybody's, right? Reasonable point. I'm more than comfortable to move forward with that as long as it's done in a timely and orderly and productive and constructive way. I will note that the likelihood that the type of people who Councilmember Jawando very importantly is noting have not been included frequently in those types of outreach are not likely to be included in this one either. I mean, that's just, as hard as we may try, that has not been something that this council, or frankly any local government anywhere in America that I'm aware of, has been particularly good at. And so perhaps some of the specific targeted groups that Councilmember Jawando talked about that represent underrepresented people in these conversations be part of a formal or informal conversation, separate from that could happen, at the same time, could happen, one of our July sessions that we have coming up, invite them and offer, specific feedback. And, Councilmember Jawando started a list that I think is pretty good, and, we can add to it and have a few people here. And maybe that, could be this overflow session that we already have scheduled for this conversation, since this has been, a big part of it, or we can, schedule a subsequent one. But to me, that would, I think, satisfy what is intended here, which I think is an important point that's being raised. I'll leave it at that because I have a couple other points on the other stuff, but I'll put that up there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're not far off here. I think it's just the amount of, I mean, look, I'm committing personally to helping with getting the people in the room that I think. I got some texts while I'm sitting here about groups, that want to be engaged on this. I got a text from someone from the African American Health Program, for example, that would like to, have input. And so I think that we can put together, and what I was suggesting, it was a large in-person event preceded by targeted outreach, which I think is what you're saying, Councilmember both Friedson and Reamer. We'll see what we can get, realizing we're at the second half of July into August. But I think we can begin that engagement, make sure people are looking at the highlights of the document. That was one of the questions I was going to ask for Ms. Wright. I think I've seen a executive summary or some sort of condensed version of the, that has the link into the plan, but maybe not. But we could.
No, we have an explainer document, a short explainer document.
Yeah, and we could, send that with and say, hey, start looking at this. We're trying to get engagement. It's a once in a century opportunity. Do some of that in some of these specific targeted communities that were underrepresented, and then, have another in-person thing in September. Maybe that concurrently is happening with our sessions, but the real thing I'm unclear on is whether you're, Mr. Chairman, I guess I'll direct this to you, are trying to make decisions at the committee level in July and put things to bed, because I think that would be an issue.
We don't have to. I do think there are some things that we could say, like we'd like to have a chapter on sustainability in the environment. Like,
sure.
I think there's some, low-hanging fruit.
I'd like to see something similar on the racial. I have some comments on the racial equity components, and I get your point there.
So I do want to just note that we don't have a lot of capacity, staff capacity or funding right now to start another round of engagement. And so this is now a council document, and we would do everything we can to support and provide materials, but we think a lot of the organization of events probably is going to need to be handled by council, because again, although you aren't seeing it, we are working madly away on the next set of plans to come to you on Silver Spring, on Fairland, on Corridor Forward, and those actually are, particularly Corridor Forward has some important and timely kinds of ideas and recommendations in it. So, we want to be as helpful as possible in doing anything the council wants us to do. But I do want to just emphasize that I believe a lot of this is going to need to be, and honestly, I think you'll feel more certain that it's going the way you want it to go if you all are taking the lead in organizing.
I think that that's fair. I mean, in all fairness to us, we had ample opportunity to share what we thought would be better engagement. We didn't do that. The council now has this document, and if council members or this committee or the council, broadly wants to do the engagement, it's up to us to do it. That's the point.
Just realizing that might take some time.
Well, look, I mean, it depends on what you want to do. We could readily do a PHED roundtable, with thought leaders, who can speak knowledgeably on behalf of communities that we feel need to be better engaged. That's not.
That was that is my suggestion. Then we do it in a public way that others can engage if, there are things that are raised that they agree with or disagree with, and do that as a session.
So
I think that could be a component of that. So can we just, I think we have general agreement. Maybe we can work with Pam and Linda and us three to our offices to just put I agree with Ms. Wright, a kind of a draft schedule based on this that we can try to get some agreement on offline, and then to Andrew's point, to Councilman Friesen's point, make sure the public knows what it is and can engage with it. I think it's going to be hard to really do those things prior to September, frankly. But I think we can do them in September.
Could I also suggest that, if I do think that the chair is right, that there are certain decisions, that, perhaps we could do and begin doing because it requires work, certain things that other plans did in other places that perhaps, staff, it seems, believes, could be done here. Like, we should get those recommendations now.
Yeah.
We should have those by next week. We should be deciding those before we break for recess so that staff can work on, implementing that type of direction and have something for us to actually formally vote on in September, and have something for folks to weigh in on when we do this type of engagement. I think that the points, raised about if there's an interest in a specific chapter on, sustainability in the environment, that's something that we should talk about, decide now, so that August could be a time where, the work that needs to be done on that actually is done. So, and that community members will have time to, digest it. I don't think we need to decide the words and the commas. That will be when we come back in September to approve this. But I think we need to decide, things that probably, should have been discussed and decided leading up to this, point. But, we should decide on these big questions now. And I think it would be better for engagement. It's hard to engage people when they're shadow boxing. They don't know what they're supposed to engage on. So I think as much in the big picture that we can offer, if we're making big picture changes, like adding a chapter, for instance, or adding a component from a best practice that we perceive from another plan, or at least considering those actions, then I think we ought to do that now and allow for some public feedback, that we decide on it in July through August, and when we come back in September.
Well, again, I think we may just need to follow up more offline, but if we want to move this forward, we've got a nice amount of time between now and September's PHED meetings to compile changes that we think are needed, sort through them, think them over, and then, have them ready to go. And to the extent that we want to do additional feedback, there's, we could do that to some extent. I think by the time, but but that's kind of in conflict with having a lot more feedback in September. Because what's the point of the feedback if you've already got your suggestions ready to go?
Yeah, I don't see it as in conflict. I think there's two different aspects of this. One are the specific aspects of each item that we're doing line by line, which ultimately we're going to have to decide and we're going to have to do. Then there are these broad concerns or questions that have been raised, including whether or not there are certain best practice elements from other jurisdictions that were included. Well, I would like to hear about those and think through those. Staff has raised it, so let's address that. I think that you can't expect a member of the public to know that the Richmond 300 plan includes a certain element and to be able to meaningfully weigh in on that unless we talk about it and decide that that's a direction that we're interested in heading in. And then ultimately, we have to give direction to staff to put some of that into practice and operate, and then come back to us, and then we have to debate and discuss what the specifics are. Because, like everything, the devil's in the details.
I just have to step in about this best practice idea. You may or may not acknowledge it, but we are the best planning department in this region. When I advertise for positions, people from every other department in this region, including the ones that we're focusing on, come and beg to work here. The document you have, if it allows to get finished, is probably going to win a Burnham Award. But I do have a problem with this idea that somehow we haven't been following best practices. We have worked with the State Office of Planning to assure that we are following best practices. We are a planning agency that wins awards literally every year for the work that we do. We set the standard of what best practices are. So I have to say that really is very dismaying to have that conversation that somehow, a community of 300,000 people in Hawaii or wherever has best practices that we don't follow. So I don't mind, opening it up, because we debated about whether we needed, an environment chapter, an equity chapter, an economy chapter, and the board debated that. And we can talk to you about why it ended up the way it ended up. But I think to essentially talk about how we have to go back and look at best practices for this document, it's frankly insulting. I have to tell you, it's insulting. And I think that we are, again, we are 100% open to talking about, well, why did we not include an environment chapter? Let's talk about that, and maybe that needs to change. How did we weave equity into this document? Did we do it sufficiently? Maybe it needs to be tweaked and updated in some way to make it stronger. But, I honestly have to say that the idea of going back to square one on this document and saying, well, it doesn't look like, Richmond's document, that is not going to be a productive conversation.
Well, I appreciate that. First of all, I agree with you. We do have the best planning department in the region and among the best in the country. And I tried my best earlier to defend the hard work of the planning department, because I do, believe that. What I was suggesting, just to be very clear, is that the council staff has suggested that there are other items and other plans. And I think that rather than having this broad-based question, that I understand why it would be dismaying and frustrating for you, that if council staff has specific elements from a specific plan that they think we ought to consider, then that should be presented to us, and we should decide on that in July if there's something that we wanted to add. Similarly, this question of the environmental chapter and the racial equity specific chapter, that exact conversation of why they weren't included, I know these were discussions, we ought to have that conversation in July and make a decision whether or not we agree with those. And then I think we head into August with any of those big tweaks, changes, that the community can weigh in on, because we're having some additional outreach and feedback, which I think is appropriate and reasonable. And then we can work through the details of that, those broad-based decisions in the fall. To me, that seems reasonable. If I was misinterpreted of being disrespectful of the planning department staff and your work and expertise, I didn't intend that. And I certainly at least tried earlier to defend it, because I actually think you have done and continue to do really great work and consistently say that. But I think that, we also have a process here that we have to review what is done. We have to make policy decisions of, whether or not we agree or disagree. And I don't think that it's helpful to take a whole plan and compare it to our plan. I think if there are elements of a plan that, are of interest, then we ought to discuss them and decide whether or not they make sense to incorporate or not incorporate. So I just wanted to clarify that. And Ms. Wright, I appreciate your passion, and I think it's a testament to your dedication. And I hope as I said before, that I agree with you wholeheartedly about the type of team that you lead and how fortunate we are to have such expertise on the planning board staff. I will also say that I think as part of that conversation that we have, and it should be, in these scheduled meetings in July, if we can fit it in, is this question of the planning board draft versus the staff draft and what the differences were and what council staff thinks about that, because we ought to have a conversation about that too, just like we would in the growth and infrastructure policy, and just like we would in anything else. There is a staff draft, there is a planning board, finally approved, and generally we, receive some, an understanding of that. Council staff has noted some changes, and I think we specifically should, discuss those, both the big picture, any big picture changes, but then also once we get into the details, those detail changes.
Good point. And I had earlier asked Pam to prepare kind of a crosswalk between the planning board draft and the staff draft, and that could be a good. We could work through that maybe at our next PHED meeting.
Well, the problem is that is pretty much impossible, because the whole point of the planning board draft, or rewrite, if you will, was not to change the substantive outcome. It's not like there were 15 things that the staff said in the staff draft and the planning board agreed with 12 of them and added, 5 more of its own. That's not what happened. We rewrote the draft because we were trying to change the way we communicated the ideas in the staff draft, not because we were trying to make wholesale changes to the recommendations. And therefore, there's no red line. It is simply not possible, other than if you want to read them both, to really compare what's in one and what's in the other in the different way that you would.
Casey, is that true for every chapter though? I'm under the impression that you maybe rewrote more of the introduction, though?
No, I doubt there is a single word in the staff draft that is in the same place or expressed in the same way in the planning board draft, because it was a complete recapitulation, a reframing of the
recapitulation. I think you mean to say, not capitulation.
Recapitulation, recapping of resummarization of the ideas that were in the staff draft. The whole point of rewriting the document was not to say, hey, we didn't agree with the staff about this, and so we're going to do something different. The point of rewriting the document was saying, we think that the staff draft did not effectively communicate or organize the ideas that the staff had assembled. And so there's very little difference, actually. I mean, yeah, I'm not going to say there's nothing important that was changed substantively, but what I am saying is this is not the typical situation where the staff would say, hey, here's the Bethesda plan. What do you think about this? And we said, oh, how about an overlay zone for, trading density and $10 a square foot for FAR? This is not like that. So you're going to go down a rabbit hole if you try to create a document that says, well, let's compare and contrast what the staff draft said to what the planning board draft said. They said largely the same thing with some limited exceptions.
Well, one of the things that I noticed, I did take a peek at the staff plan before. There was some document that I was shown that took the staff document and then the new document and had some lines drawing like this went to there and that went to there. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, Pam, but it was almost incomprehensible as far as.
And I think that's the point I'm trying to make.
I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah. Right. Khalid put that together, and I think what Khalid was trying to communicate there was, hey guys, it's all here somewhere else, but rather than trying to do a red line or a compare and contrast, really, if you have specific questions about, well, gee, I'm not sure where this went, we can address those. But I think you're going to wind up frustrated if you try to, or whoever you give the assignment of trying to write a comparison document. You'll be giving them a little bit of a fool's errand to try to, create a document.
I think the point that I was trying to raise earlier, whether it's the staff draft versus the planning board draft, or whether it's highlighting a few other award-winning, more recent comprehensive plans, I think it's much less helpful to have these overarching comments, and conversations, because we're not really talking about anything here. It's much better, and it will be much more effective and much easier for community members to give real substantive input if we actually talk about the things that we're referencing. And so that was what I was trying to say. I am not suggesting that Richmond's planning department is better than Montgomery County's planning department, or that a 300,000 person jurisdiction in Hawaii is. I'm suggesting that it was pointed out that these are good plans, and if the staff has suggestions of elements within those plans that we ought to consider putting in here, then I'd like to specifically know what those are, and I think we ought to specifically discuss those. Similarly, there was this question of the staff draft versus the planning board staff. I don't think it's helpful to say that there's differences between the staff draft and the planning board staff, because that really makes no difference. What will make a difference is if staff has a specific suggestion, a specific concern, a specific at least issue before the council that she thinks we ought to consider. And so that's what I'm suggesting, is we need to move this conversation from the theoretical to the specifics. We don't have to get into the sentence structure specifically right now, but we ought to start with the specific elements of the plan and make decisions accordingly.
So if I could just, I agree with what you're saying, Councilman Friedson. Like, and the council chair has said two things. The chair of the PHED committee, Mr. Reamer, has said two things. Like the environmental section, I mentioned the racial equity section. Pam Dunn has mentioned other components, the vision document, the scoping. There's all reasons why that, and both Ms. Wright and Mr. Anderson have said there's reasons why we did or didn't do it. So let's get specific. I agree with you. Let's get a list of items in between now and the next session and say, and then we can have suggestions from staff about what elements should be included, updated, kept, thoughts like, and then from council members, which I think is what you're saying. I'm just restating it in a way that I understand it. I think that would be a good productive use of our next session time, and then we can still do the engagement process that we discussed and refine that offline as well.
And this is Khalid. I just want to add that we did send a memo of what research and work we did looking at other jurisdictions' plans, and I think that memo was forwarded to you. What we focused on was we looked at maybe 20 or 30, I have all those plans in my list here. We focused on the plans that were comparable to Montgomery County in terms of their population, their size, their economy, something like that. We did not focus on award-winning plans because, again, I think the memo that we sent you makes the point that a lot of these plans that you've seen, and I will look at it again to confirm, I'm pretty sure that all 5 or 6 of the plans you've seen, for those jurisdictions, those plans are the only plans they do. That's their master plan, that's their local plan, that's their zoning plan, that's their implementation plan, that's their code. And so what we're trying to say is, and we're all trying to say the planning side is, this exercise of, I mean, absolutely we will look at it again if it comes back to, we don't have the discussion to say if we missed anything, but we already looked at that in very detail from Imagine Boston to LA's plan to smaller plan, but we try to keep it so that we are not looking at something that's not relevant. Comparable jurisdictions with similar challenges, populations, sizes, and also we try to find their planning framework and process was similar. Like we have 55 master and sector plans, about 5 or 6 countywide plans. And we found that no other jurisdiction does that. I mean, even in this geography here, Howard County is currently doing their general plan. That's their only plan, except for in the last 2 or 3 years, they started to doing 2 small area plans. But that's their only plan. So Howard County is doing, from scenarios, and they hired consultants. They will do zoning implementation. They will change zoning. They will change land use. They will do everything because that is their master plan. That's their sector plan. That's their zoning plan and everything. So we should also discuss about why we did, as Gwen and Casey was saying, there is a reason why we did that. And if we have that discussion before we decide whatever we are going to do, let us, maybe the next work session, if we talk about with the council staff, why is the plan the way it is? And yes, we looked at other jurisdictions. We can, give you that information also. And if you look at that memo that we already sent, that will tell you a lot about,
Yeah, we're a unique kind of jurisdiction. Our general plan, which is updated, has been updated. We're talking about like every 30 years rather than every 10 years or every 5 years as some of these other jurisdictions. It's because it's a different kind of document. It's a much higher level policy document than what the vast majority of jurisdictions do when they do a general plan. Tanya Stern, our deputy planning director, worked intensively on the DC comp plan, and she can tell you it's a different animal. It is not the same as our general plan. It gets down to deciding zoning recommendations or density recommendations in specific properties, in specific areas. It is a voluminous document. Our general plan is a different animal. It's a much higher level policy document.
If I could just add quickly, just as Gwen or Director Wright noted, before I joined the planning department, I worked for a number of years at the DC Office of Planning. And one of the big projects that I was working on literally up into my last day there was on the amendments to DC's comprehensive plan, which just finished. The DC Council just approved those big changes. And, I was a project director. So this is basically the second time I've gone through a project like this. So I was able to bring a lot of that experience to our department as we embarked on this project. But as Gwen noted, DC's comprehensive plan it's very much a policy plan, but it does have additional details, as you noted. DC also does small area plans, just as we do area master plans here. But one other point I wanted to mention to build off of what Khalid noted, in the other comparable plans that we looked at several in this region at our sister jurisdictions that are dealing with all the same issues that Montgomery County is also dealing with. And a lot of those general plans, comprehensive plans, have been updated within the last 5 years. So they are also very recent plans. We also met, with staff. Khalid, I know, had a number of meetings with staff in different jurisdictions in the early part of this project. So again, I think in terms of the discussion about looking at other types of general plans in terms of best practices that the committee may be interested in looking at in terms of evaluating this plan, we just want you all to just be aware of the fact that we also did our own research at the beginning of this project. And as planners, when we look at other types of plans, we try to find plans that are more comparable. So, even though there are award-winning plans from other jurisdictions, if they're much smaller, if they're dealing with a whole other set of issues, from my own just professional perspective, we don't find it to be quite as helpful as looking at the plans of jurisdictions that are more comparable in terms of size, in terms of the types of issues that we're dealing with. So we just want to make sure that the committee is aware of that there's actually a larger pool of other plans if you want to, look at other examples.
And I also just want to quickly add that I talked to the APA person who is in charge of evaluating all these master plans, other jurisdictions plans. And so I had an extensive discussion because once I started looking at it, I didn't find many comparable plans. So I thought I would check with him. And I discussed with him, had a meeting with him, talked to him, and he said, explained how our process works planning. And he acknowledged, and I asked it, my question to him was, do you have any comparable plans that I should be looking at that you have looked at? APA, you have, every year you look at a whole bunch of plans. Can you point me to other plans that are more comparable to us? And he acknowledged that I don't have a lot of examples for you because what you're telling me about Montgomery County and process, it is a very unique process.
Okay.
The planning process and regulatory process and everything.
Thank you. Okay, so Pam, what is our schedule for PHED meetings for the rest of the month?
Okay, so we had tentatively scheduled one for next week, but I don't believe staff can pull together everything that I think you would like to have, listening to Councilmember Friedson and Councilmember Tawando and yourself. And if you read the very last paragraph in the staff report, it said the goal, I think, would be to come back to you on the 26th with basically information to see where the committee wanted to head, with a vision, basically a vision statement. Again, that is something that we did notice is in the planning staff draft, not in planning board draft, called out as a vision statement. I get there are a couple 4 pages that really kind of do encapsulate that. But as Councilmember Friedson saying, we can kind of bring you this broader outline. Here's some things that we noticed as staff, the committee might want to consider having a structure like this. So it's not actually bringing the text. It wouldn't be, doing red lines or anything like that by the end of the month, but it could be a detailed outline of, here's what we see in the current draft, but here are some things, a different way of structuring it. And that's also sort of what was at the end of the staff report. Get the committee's input on restructuring, if there's any. And it may not be a lot. I don't know where this is headed. And it's going to be the committee's will.
Let me, rather than asking you to present us with how it should be restructured, could we start keeping the next meeting that we have with a series of observations or comments by staff as to what they think could be some of the improvements?
So I was only mentioning it the way I did because you had mentioned wanting to do drafting in August. That won't happen if we provide observations, but there's really nothing before you to make decisions on. I'm a little confused about what do you want?
I'm trying to say how we want to be able to provide you with guidance as to what exactly we think should be redrafted or written. So rather than having
I guess what I'm saying is, if we don't get into content, it's going to be hard for us to redraft anything in August. And I think what I'm hearing is that really the conversation is going to stay at a pretty broad level, which is, about content of material that should go back and forth between maybe what was in an earlier draft or what are in other drafts and seem to not be as called out or whatever,
I don't know. I think we're talking past each other. again, let me just restate it so you can react to me. I'm asking you at the next PHED meeting to come with a list of points that you would like to make about the draft that we've received, so that the committee can discuss whether those are concerns that we share and that we would like you to draft, language or figure out how to address. That would be a way to get pen to paper and get moving on drafting. If you were to come to us, what I think I heard you say was more like, we'd like to bring you a vision of how this document might work. And then you would go and write a new document or write a substantially changed document.
Yeah, no, I wasn't trying to say that.
Well, write a substantially changed document. And then you bring that back to us, in September. Again, maybe you could express what your theory is here of the next 2, 4, 6 weeks. Tell us what you would have in mind.
So again, and it's not just me, I just want to make this clear, that is reviewing the general plan. We have been, as the analysts and attorneys have had multiple discussion groups meetings on it, and we are trying to look at it as a team, because it's not just about one portion of land use. It's really how land use affects other things. And obviously that we have a lot of experts in different areas, especially Linda in planning or housing, and Glenn, Jean. So it's so how I would see, I kind of agree. I think we are talking about the same thing for the meeting on the 26th, which is to bring you, maybe that broader document of, okay, here was, what are in some other plans. Here's what in the 64, 69, and 93 plans. That was in this conversation too. It's not just what do other people do. It's what have we done in the past? How have we structured this in the past? And what's the draft before us? And what are the comments we've been hearing? Okay, given all of that, here are some observations of things that, we think the committee should consider concerning the planning board draft.
Right, but can't you do some of that on the 21st or the other day that we had?
I can check with staff to see if we can pull it together, but it would mean today's Wednesday, we'd have to post Friday. I mean, I don't know that we can pull that together fast enough.
Well, I think if the deadline that you're worried about is the advanced posting of the packet, we're not making any decisions. A late packet isn't the end of the world.
Well, so my question would be, if we brought it Wednesday versus just the following Monday, it wouldn't be a jump start on any additional work.
Yeah, just give them, I think she's asking politely for, that they need the time to do that. That's how
and it might be helpful if we just got back to you in the next day or two with what we put down for something in writing for you about what the next meeting would look like, and then we can see if we're talking past each other or hitting what you want to do. I think that would be helpful for us as staff. And I would just say, how the next discussions go also potentially can impact what information is pushed out for these focus groups and, for the other engagement. So I think if we could just have like 24, 48 hours to talk as staff and get back to you on what that might look like, that would probably be helpful.
Okay.
Can I just point out, I think that's reasonable, and I think, we need to make sure that you have the time you need to do this. I will say we did get this draft 3 months ago, and this came on April the 6th. And so I do find it a little bit shocking that we weren't ready on Monday. We're not ready, to have any substantive conversations today. We won't be ready for next week. I just want to note my frustration with that. I think you heard Ms. Wright's frustration earlier, which I totally understand and can appreciate. And so we can't change what has happened and where things have been, but starting from this point forward, if we have a plan that we have advertised to the public of how we're going to take this up and the timing that it's going to be, if we're not able, based on capacity, to meet that, then we need to get ahead of it way faster and address that and change it and be much more diligent to a process than we've been up to this point, because I find this up to this point to be inadequate. And it's not fair to the public, and it's really not appropriate to the process. And so I appreciate the fact that we have a robust team on the council. I totally understand that you are stretched incredibly thin, but if there are issues to meeting the time that we've set forth, then we need to know about that much sooner, and we need to address it, either postponing the time that we expect and advertising that to the public, or removing some of the other things that are on council staff's plate, because this is arguably the most important, or among the most important things that we do at the council. And so we have to figure out a way to prioritize. That's not on you, that's on us. But in order for us to do that, we need to know about it. So I just hope, though, as we move forward, that we're communicating much better between council staff and planning staff, which doesn't seem as been as significant as could be leading up to this meeting in the last 3 months, and more communicative with our staffs in terms of planning for the process. Because if we're going to do this, and if we're going to do this right, then we all have to be on the same page. And it seems like up to this point we haven't been.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I want to say we are understaffed and have been, and you guys have been doing too much for a month and a half of that. They've been working on the budget. And then we've got all the COVID stuff, and every council member wants to do something. It's election season. Everyone's trying to push something forward. So it's just, we've grossly underinvested in the council staff apparatus, which has been a frustration for me since day one. So I appreciate that, and there does need to be better communication. But I think we came into this meeting a little unclear about what we were going to do. So it's not unreasonable to say, all right, now that we have a little more clarity about how moving forward, allow them to pull that together. So I think that's what we're saying, but I appreciate and am sensitive to, what the staff is having to do. All those.
I agree, and I'll just point out, I think that the capacity issue is a council member issue as much as anything, but we have to know about the capacity issues sooner to be able to address them, was the only point that I was trying to make. Thank you.
I'm just trying to put a boundary here. I still believe that the way forward is for us to signal to staff what we want them to focus on for rewriting or writing, this month in July, so that they can do that work before September. We come back September, I don't know what our first day will be, like the 10th or
13th, I think it is.
13th. So we got plenty of time, to get pen to paper, come back, take it up, and then, move it through. And we could do a public hearing. We could do a PHED committee public hearing in September. It's not a problem. And Councilmember Jawando has described some outreach that he thinks is important, which I agree is important. And we'll let him think about how to conduct some of that. And but in order to do that, we need council staff to share with us so we can provide some direction, as to what it is that you will, what we would like for you to focus your efforts on. So we just need you to be able to tee that up for us. Otherwise, it'll be hard to have a mandate for what you're supposed to be doing in that interim. Do you feel like I'm describing that accurately? I mean, I'd love council staff's comment on that timeline and process. Linda?
Chairman Reamer, may I just suggest something? This is Khalid. I know you're while they're thinking about it, can I say a couple of things? I think, I would let, of course, this is at this point the council and the council staff lead, but I would say if the council staff is not ready for the next, the 21st meeting, could we just still keep the date? And we have heard a lot of things that require at least the discussion that we never had, or the briefing, that some of the details that don't come through. And that question has been raised today and in the public hearing, that we can just brief you so you're more familiar with what's in the plan. And again, what is there and why it's there.
You're suggesting that planning might use that time.
Yes, if you're not having any, your staff not ready to discuss that we use that time to brief you, to get you more familiar with our plan, other jurisdictions' plans, all the questions that have been come up.
We could at least talk about what we've already heard is a concern that's been expressed about not including an environment chapter, not including the equity chapter, not including the economy chapter. We could at least talk about that and it give you, you know, our reasoning, and you can accept or reject that. But I think that that's one big topic that has come up frequently, and that we, you know, we could be prepared on the 21st to at least explain why we did what we did.
It sounds like a useful discussion. So we'll do that on the 21st. You're muted again, Khalid. Yeah.
Yes, and that discussion might also help your question about, you know, or even the council staff about deciding which side needs more. Maybe, you know, we are talking about introducing something, not introducing something. I think a lot of that I'm feeling, I'm sensing that we need to, pardon me for using this word, educate you more about what this plan is and how we have it, the way we have it, and why we have it.
Sure. Okay.
Familiarize, yeah. And then that would still allow for the council staff to tee up what they need to tee up for the 26th.
Agreed. I think that's a great idea, and I think we, at the very least, owe it to all the hard work that has gone into it for the planning staff to be able to present why they did what they did and what the rationales behind it and all the work that has gone into it for us to, you know, start our thought process as we review it.
Okay. All right. Well, friends, we have a plan for our next meeting, and we'll work through this together, and we'll come out with a great product. And we've been given a great product, and we'll make our improvements at the council, and we'll get it done. We'll get it done in a timeline that allows the council and the committee to do not only this, but other important initiatives that we have before us. So, all right. Thank you. We'll adjourn for the day. Thank you.